You know, there is this one temptation that has proven to be absolutely irresistible for governments all throughout history. It's the power to create money out of nothing. It's like a siren song. So let's dive into the story of how this one simple act has repeated itself over and over again and, well, with the same disastrous results every single time.
And that idea from Ron Paul is really at the heart of what we're talking about today. It's a pretty bold claim, right? But as we're about to see, history has some absolutely stunning evidence to back it up.
And our story begins, as so many do, in ancient Rome. The Roman Empire really gave us the original, the blueprint, you could say, for how to completely destroy a currency. It's a story of trust, betrayal, and some truly, truly bad math.
So here's how the Roman scheme worked. It was actually deceptively simple. Back in 60 AD, the main coin, the denarius, was basically pure silver. But then Emperor Nero found himself a little short on cash, so he had an idea. What if we just shave a little silver off each coin and mix in some cheaper metal? All of a sudden, you can make way more coins with the same amount of silver. And you can bet his successors loved this little trick. For the next 200 years, they just couldn't help themselves.
And this is the result. By the year 301, the Roman economy had been hit with a jaw-dropping 6,300% cumulative inflation. The amount of money had just exploded, and prices, of course, skyrocketed right along with it. Think about it. Entire lifetimes of savings, stored in what people thought was valuable silver, had turned to worthless dust.
So how did the government handle this crisis? Did they fix the money? Nope. Instead, they blamed greedy merchants for the high prices. Emperor Diocletian actually issued an edict setting the price for, well, everything. And if you overcharged, the penalty was death. And this introduces a key part of the pattern we're going to see again and again, governments attacking the symptom, rising prices, instead of the cause. And of course, it was a complete and total failure.
Now, Rome wasn't just a one-off. It turns out, throughout history, all these different civilizations, separated by centuries, by whole continents, they all acted like different chefs, following the exact same disastrous recipe. And here is that recipe for ruin. It's a shockingly simple four-step process. First, the government spends way more money than it actually has. Second, it just creates new money out of thin air to cover the difference. Third, all this new money creates a short artificial boom where everything feels great and everyone feels rich. And finally, number 4, the whole thing comes crashing down.
Okay, let's jump forward in time to China. China invented paper money, a totally amazing innovation. But it also turned out to be a much, much more efficient way to destroy a currency. The Yuan dynasty printed so much of it that when Marco Polo visited, he was amazed. He said they had discovered the secret of the alchemists. Well, by the 1300s, that magic wore off, the currency collapsed, and the dynasty collapsed right along with it.
And let's fast forward again to the French Revolution. The revolutionaries issued their own paper money called assignats. At first, they tried to be disciplined, but pretty soon, those printing presses were running red hot. By the end of it all, they had printed 45.5 billion of these notes, and they were completely worthless. You see the pattern? A brief boom, followed by price controls, and then a total, catastrophic collapse. Now, seeing a pattern is one thing, but really understanding the mechanics behind it, that's something else entirely. And that's where this group of thinkers, known as the Austrian economists, comes into the story. You should think of them less like stuffy academics and more like intellectual detectives who figured out exactly why this cycle of ruin keeps happening over and over again. And here are the 3 key figures. You've got Ludwig von Mises, who really identified the root cause, central banks creating fake credit booms. Then his student, Friedrich Hayek, who actually won a Nobel Prize for explaining how all this new money messes with the price signals that make an economy work. And finally, Murray Rothbard, who took their theories and just brilliantly applied them to explain real historical events. So here's the crucial point they all made, a really simple but revolutionary distinction. You and I were taught to think that inflation is rising prices. But the Austrians argue, no, that's just the symptom. The actual disease, the inflation itself, is the expansion of the money supply. And this simple shift completely changes who's to blame. It's not greedy merchants, it's whoever controls the printing press.
And they explained how this whole process creates so much inequality through something called the Cantillon effect. See, new money doesn't just spread out evenly like butter on toast. It gets injected at specific points, right at the top, to banks, to government contractors, to the politically connected. They get to spend that new money at today's prices. But by the time it finally trickles down to regular wage earners and retirees, prices have already gone up. It's basically a hidden tax that transfers wealth from the poor and middle class to the powerful.
Okay, so all this history brings us to the modern era, and to a single day that honestly changed everything. August 15th, 1971. This was the day that the entire global economy, led by the United States, embarked on the single largest monetary experiment in all of human history. So what led to this crazy moment? Well, after World War II, the US dollar was pegged to gold. But decades of massive spending on wars and social programs meant that the US had printed way more dollars than it actually had gold to back them up. And other countries, especially France, started to get nervous. They started showing up and demanding their gold back, and it was quickly draining America's vaults.
By 1971, things were at a breaking point. The world was calling America's bluff. There were far more dollars floating around overseas than the U.S. had gold in its reserves. The system was about to snap. So, what would President Nixon do?
He cut the anchor. On that Sunday night, Nixon went on TV and announced that the U.S. would no longer redeem dollars for gold. And just look what happened next. With the discipline of gold completely gone, government debt absolutely exploded. It went from under $400 billion to over 38 times trillion.
And what about your dollar? Remember, Nixon promised people on that broadcast that their dollar would be worth just as much the next day. Well, today, a US dollar from 1971 has the purchasing power of just 12.5 cents. That's a loss of nearly 88% of its value.
So you see, this isn't just some story about Roman coins or old Chinese paper. This historical pattern connects directly to the world we are all living in today. It explains so many of the economic crises and trends that we've all felt.
Now pay very close attention to the date on this slide. This is Ron Paul, using that same Austrian framework we talked about to predict the 2008 housing crisis 6 years before it actually happened. He pointed directly to the central bank's artificially low interest rates as the cause of the bubble, and he even predicted the taxpayer-funded bailouts that would inevitably follow. It's uncanny.
And remember that Cantillon effect, the one about who gets the new money first? Well, here's what it looks like in the real world. Since 1971, the year the dollar was cut from gold, the middle class's share of the national income has been steadily shrinking. Now, the Austrians would argue this is no accident. It's a direct result of a system that favors those closest to the money printer.
And get this, the problem is actually speeding up. The annual interest payment alone on the U.S. national debt is projected to hit $1 trillion. We're not even talking about paying down the debt itself. That's just the interest. It just goes to show you how this cycle of spending and money creation starts to feed on itself, getting bigger and bigger.
So, we're left with this. From Roman emperors secretly shaving silver off their coins, to modern central bankers creating trillions with a few keystrokes, the pattern of monetary destruction is just remarkably consistent. The warnings have been there for centuries, and every single time, governments and their bankers believe that this time they've got it under control, that this time it'll be different. So the only real question for us is, are they right?